The summer storm rolled across the red mountains like a dark tide, its thunder echoing through the canyons and mesas of the frontier. Lightning split the sky in jagged white forks, illuminating the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge for brief, blinding moments. The rain came down in sheets, turning the packed earth to mud, washing clean the wooden storefronts and saloon signs that lined the street. Inside the Broken Wheel Saloon, Clara May stood on the small wooden stage, her voice cutting through the din of drinking men and clinking glasses. She wore a dress of deep burgundy, its fabric worn but clean, the hem carefully mended where it had torn on a nail months ago. Her auburn hair was pinned up in the fashion of the day, though a few strands had escaped to frame her pale face. She sang of lost loves and distant shores, her voice carrying a melancholy that seemed to reach into the very souls of those who bothered to listen. Most didn't bother. To them, she was just another saloon singer, another woman who'd fallen far enough to entertain rough men for coins. They saw the paint on her lips, the low cut of her dress, and made their judgments accordingly. The respectable women of Cedar Ridge crossed the street rather than pass too close to the saloon, pulling their skirts aside as if Clara's very presence might stain them. The storm intensified, rattling the windows in their frames. Rain drummed on the tin roof like 1,000 fingertips, and the oil lamps flickered in the drafts that found their way through every crack and crevice. Clara finished her song to scattered applause and a few thrown coins that clinked on the stage floor. She bent to collect them, her movements graceful despite her weariness. That's when the doors swung open. The man who entered brought the storm with him. Water streamed from his long duster coat, pooling on the floorboards. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but Clara could see the hard line of his jaw, the careful way he moved that spoke of a man accustomed to danger. He stood there for a moment, scanning the room with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to catalog threats before they materialized. Luke Harland had been gone from Cedar Ridge for 8 months, leading a surveying expedition into the unmapped territories beyond the Colorado River. The frontier had left its mark on him. His skin was weathered dark by sun and wind, and there was a new scar along his left cheekbone that hadn't been there before. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the Colt .45 on his hip sat easy in its holster, like an old friend. He found an empty table near the back, hanging his sodden coat on a chair. When the bartender brought him whiskey, he drank it slow, his gray eyes never leaving the stage where Clara had resumed singing. Her voice washed over him like cool water on a burn, easing something tight and painful that had lived in his chest throughout the long months on the trail. Clara felt his gaze like a physical touch. She'd noticed him the moment he walked in. How could she not? There was something about the way he held himself, quiet and contained, like a man who kept his own counsel. When their eyes met across the smoky room, she nearly forgot the words to her song. There was a loneliness in his expression that matched her own, a weariness that went bone deep. The storm raged on, turning the saloon into an island in a sea of rain and darkness. Men continued to drink and gamble, their voices rising and falling with their luck at the cards. But for Clara and the quiet stranger, the rest of the room had faded to shadows. When her set ended, Clara stepped down from the stage. She moved between the tables, avoiding grabbing hands and crude comments with practiced ease. But instead of retreating to her small room behind the bar as she usually did, she found herself drawn to the stranger's table. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. Luke gestured to the empty chair. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the careful way he watched everything and everyone. Scout, she thought. She'd seen enough of them pass through to recognize the type. "You sing real pretty," he said, his voice rough from trail dust and disuse. "Pretty enough to earn my keep." Clara replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her tone. "That's not what I meant." She looked at him sharply, searching for mockery or condescension, but found neither. Just that steady gray gaze and something that might have been understanding. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it shook the bottles behind the bar. In the brief silence that followed, Someone started up the old piano in the corner, playing a waltz melody that was almost lost in the resumed noise of the crowd. Luke stood, extending his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Clara stared at him. Men didn't dance with saloon singers. They bought them drinks. They made propositions. They treated them like property. But they didn't ask them to dance like they were respectable women at a Sunday social. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Luke Harland, scout and guide, when there's work to be had." "Clara May." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "One dance." They moved to a clear space near the piano. Luke's hand was warm and calloused against hers, his other hand resting light and proper at her waist. They began to move to the music, and Clara was surprised to find he danced well, with a natural grace that belied his rough appearance. "Where does Scout learn to waltz?" she asked. "My mother, back in Missouri, before—" He trailed off, his expression distant. "Before I came west." They turned and swayed, and for a moment Clara could almost imagine they were somewhere else, somewhere clean and proper, where she wasn't looked at with contempt, where he wasn't marked by violence and solitude. The storm outside seemed to ease, as if even nature was holding its breath. "One stormy dance with the saloon singer," Luke whispered, so soft she almost didn't hear it over the music. Clara's throat tightened. There was something in the way he said it, like he was trying to preserve the moment, to hold on to it against all the lonely days to come. She understood that feeling too well. They danced until the song ended, neither speaking again. When the last note faded, they stood for a moment, still holding each other, reluctant to break the spell. Then reality intruded. A drunk cowboy stumbled into them, laughing crudely, and the moment shattered. Luke stepped back, releasing her. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Clara." She wanted to say something, anything to make him stay. But what could she offer? She was a saloon singer in a frontier town, living day to day on the coins men threw at her feet. He was a scout, bound to the wild places and the endless trail. Their worlds had intersected for one brief dance. Nothing more. Dawn came gray and wet, the storm having passed in the night. Luke gathered his things, preparing to leave. He'd resupplied and rested. There was no reason to linger. But as he stood at the bar settling his bill, he found himself looking back at the empty stage. Clara stood in the doorway to the back rooms, still in her burgundy dress. She looked smaller in the pale morning light, more fragile. Their eyes met one last time, and something passed between them, acknowledgement of what might have been. In a different world, a different life. Then Luke turned and walked out into the muddy street, and Clara retreated to her room. The saloon was quiet now, littered with the debris of the night's revelry. She sat on her narrow bed and touched her hand where he'd held it, wondering why one dance with a stranger had left her feeling more alone than ever. Outside, Luke mounted his horse and turned its head toward the mountains. He didn't look back. But as he rode out of Cedar Ridge, the memory of her voice and the warmth of her hand in his settled deep in his chest, where he knew it would remain through all the long, lonely miles ahead. The morning after Luke's departure brought no mercy to Clara May. She woke to the harsh reality of her life in Cedar Ridge, where the memory of a gentle dance couldn't shield her from the town's cruel judgment. As she walked to the general store for supplies, Mrs. Abigail Preston, the banker's wife, gathered her skirts and crossed to the other side of the street, her nose wrinkled as if she'd caught scent of something foul. "Shameless!" Clara heard her mutter to her companion, Mrs. Dorothy Walsh, parading around in daylight as if she were decent folk. Clara kept her head high, though each word cut deep. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. Inside the store, Mr. Jameson served her with barely concealed distaste, overcharging her for flour and beans. She paid without complaint, knowing that arguing would only give him excuse to ban her entirely. Back at the Broken Wheel, the owner, Ezra Blackwood, was already drunk despite the early hour. He was a heavy-set man with greasy hair and hands that wandered too freely. He'd bought the saloon 6 months ago and had made Clara's life increasingly difficult since— "You're late," he growled as she entered through the back door. "The store was crowded." Clara lied, setting down her meager purchases. "Don't care, you cost me money last night, mooning over that drifter instead of working the room." The boys want entertainment, not some weepy woman acting like she's too good for them. Clara bit her tongue. She'd learned that defending herself only made things worse. Blackwood stepped closer, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "Maybe you need reminding of your place here," he said, reaching for her arm. She stepped back quickly, putting the table between them. "I'll make it up tonight. I know some new songs the men will like." He glared at her but didn't pursue. "You'd better. And wear something that shows more skin. That old dress makes you look like somebody's grandmother." Clara retreated to her small room, hands shaking as she closed the door. She leaned against it, closing her eyes. For a moment, she let herself remember Luke's careful touch, the respectful distance he'd maintained even while dancing. Such a stark contrast to the daily degradation she endured. Meanwhile, 100 miles north, Luke Harland led his surveying team through a narrow canyon. The work was hard and dangerous, mapping potential railroad routes through hostile territory. But he welcomed the challenge, the physical exhaustion that might help him forget a pair of sad green eyes and a voice like honey and sorrow. "You're pushing too hard, Harland," said Thomas Mackenzie, the expedition's cartographer. "We've covered more ground in 3 days than most teams do in a week." Luke didn't slow his pace. "Winter's coming. Need to finish before the passes close." But that wasn't the real reason, and perhaps Mackenzie knew it. The real reason was that when Luke stopped moving, when he lay in his bedroll staring at the stars, he heard Clara's voice in the wind. He felt the phantom warmth of her hand in his. One dance, and she'd lodged herself in his mind like a splinter, working deeper with each passing day. Back in Cedar Ridge, the town's harsh nature intensified with the weather. A drought had settled over the territory, turning the landscape brown and brittle. Water became scarce, tempers short. The saloon stayed busy as men sought escape from their troubles in whiskey and cards. But their mood grew meaner. Clara bore the brunt of it. When her voice cracked from the dust and smoke, they jeered. When she refused the increasingly aggressive advances, they called her names that made her cheeks burn. Blackwood watched it all with satisfaction, occasionally reminding her that she could always earn money in other ways if singing wasn't enough. One particularly bad night, a group of cowboys fresh off a cattle drive decided Clara was being too uppity for a saloon girl. Jake Morrison, their leader, was a mean drunk with a reputation for violence. "Come on, songbird," he slurred, grabbing at her as she tried to pass. "Sing us a private song." "I'm done for the evening, Mr. Morrison," Clara said firmly, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. "Don't think you understand. I paid good money to drink in this establishment. That entitles me to all the entertainment." The other patrons watched but didn't intervene. This was the way of things in Cedar Ridge. Clara was property of the saloon, and the saloon existed to serve men like Morrison. "Let me go," Clara said, fear creeping into her voice despite her efforts to stay calm. Morrison laughed, pulling her closer. The smell of whiskey and trail dirt overwhelmed her, just as panic began to rise. Blackwood's voice cut through. "Morrison, you break my property. You buy it." Property. That's all she was. Morrison released her with a shove that sent her stumbling. "Ain't worth the price anyway." He spat. Clara fled to her room, locking the door with shaking hands. She pressed her back against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. Tears came then, hot and bitter. She wrapped her arms around her knees and let herself cry for everything she'd lost, everything she'd never have. In her mind, she heard Luke's voice again. One stormy dance with a saloon singer. Had he known, even then, that it would be their only dance? Had he felt the same pull she had, the recognition of one lonely soul finding another? She thought of his scarred face, his careful movements, the way he'd held her like she was something precious. Where was he now? Somewhere under the same stars, perhaps, but living in a different world, a world where he was free to come and go, to choose his path, a world she could never enter. The drought worsened as summer dragged on. Dust storms rolled through town, coating everything in fine grit. The well behind the saloon ran lower each day. Tempers frayed further, and violence became commonplace. 2 men died in a knife fight over cards. A woman was found beaten behind the livery stable. The sheriff, bought and paid for by men like Blackwood, did nothing. Clara grew thinner, her voice rougher. She mended her dresses until there was more thread than original fabric. She saved every penny she could, hiding them in a small tin beneath a loose floorboard. Maybe someday she'd have enough to leave, to find somewhere she could disappear and start over. But it was a fool's dream, and she knew it. Where could a woman like her go? What respectable work could she find? Still, she held on to her dignity with fierce determination. She sang with her chin high, meeting the leering gazes with steady eyes. She was Clara May, and she would not be broken. Not by Blackwood, not by Morrison, not by the contempt of the town's decent women, but late at night, when the saloon finally quieted and she lay in her narrow bed, she allowed herself to remember. A gentle hand at her waist, gray eyes that saw her as a woman, not an object. A dance in a storm that had felt like a promise of something better, even though no promises had been made. "Where are you, Luke Harland?" she whispered to the darkness. "Do you remember? Or have I already faded from your memory like smoke?" The darkness gave no answer, and Clara closed her eyes, trying to find sleep before another day of survival began. Outside, the desert wind howled through the empty streets, carrying dust and desolation, covering all traces of those who had passed through and moved on. 3 years had carved their passage across the frontier like water through stone, leaving marks on both the land and those who struggled to survive upon it. Luke Harland rode into Cedar Ridge as the sun bled red across the western mountains, painting the dusty streets in shades of copper and rust. The town looked smaller than he remembered, meaner somehow, as if the intervening years had stripped away what little civility it once possessed. He was different too. The scar along his cheekbone had been joined by others, a puckered mark on his shoulder from an Apache arrow, a thin line across his ribs from a desperate fight in a box canyon. His hair had grown longer, shot through with premature gray, and his eyes held shadows that hadn't been there before. 3 years of leading expeditions through hostile territory, of burying good men in unmarked graves, of sleeping with one hand on his gun. It all showed in the careful way he moved, the constant vigilance that had become second nature. The Broken Wheel Saloon still squatted on Main Street like a diseased tooth, its painted sign faded and peeling. Luke dismounted, tying his horse to the rail with movements made stiff by too many hours in the saddle. He'd told himself he was passing through, that Cedar Ridge was simply on the route to his next job. But that was a lie, and he was too tired to pretend otherwise. He'd carried her memory through 3 years of wilderness. In the high passes where snow never melted, he'd heard her voice in the wind. In the desert where mirages danced, he'd seen her face. One dance, that's all it had been. Yet it had burrowed into him like a seed, growing despite his attempts to uproot it. Word of his return spread quickly through the twilight streets. Cedar Ridge had a memory for faces, especially those attached to reputations. Luke Harland had become something of a legend in the territories, the scout who'd found water in the Devil's Canyon, who'd led a cavalry unit through impossible terrain to rescue a besieged settlement, who'd survived encounters that had killed lesser men. At the boarding house, Mrs. Sarah Fleming greeted him with the wary respect reserved for dangerous men who paid in advance. "Back in town, Mr. Harland? Heard you were dead. Apaches, they said." "Not quite," Luke replied, signing the register. "The Broken Wheel still operating?" Her expression soured. "That den of iniquity? Unfortunately. Yes, though it's worse than ever since Ezra Blackwood took full control. That man's got the morals of a rattlesnake and half the charm." "The singer," Luke said carefully. "Clara May, she's still there?" Mrs. Fleming's look sharpened. That girl's still singing, if that's what you're asking, though Lord knows why. Blackwood treats her worse than a dog. And the riffraff he's brought in? She shook her head. No decent person goes near that place anymore. Not that she was ever decent, mind you, but still. Christian charity makes me pity her situation. Luke took his key without comment, though his jaw tightened. After washing the trail dust away and changing into cleaner clothes, he made his way to the saloon. The sun had set, leaving the town in purple shadows. Oil lamps glowed in windows, and somewhere a dog barked at the rising moon. Even before he entered the broken wheel, he could hear the trouble. Raised voices, the crash of breaking glass, a woman's cry of distress. Luke pushed through the doors to find chaos. A group of hard-looking men had overturned tables, creating a cleared space where they'd cornered someone. Clara. She looked thinner than he remembered, her burgundy dress replaced by a faded blue one that had seen better days. But her chin was still high, her green eyes still defiant despite the fear he could see in them. One of the men, wearing the distinctive black hat of the Wallace gang, had hold of her arm. "Sing us that song again, pretty bird," the man said. "The one about lonely cowboys. Put some feeling into it this time." "I've sung enough for tonight," Clara said, trying to pull away. "Mr. Blackwood. Blackwood's cut a deal with us." Another gang member interrupted. "We get full run of the place tonight. That includes the entertainment." Luke assessed the situation quickly. 5 men, all armed. The other patrons had shrunk back against the walls. Wanting no part of whatever was about to happen, Blackwood was nowhere to be seen, probably counting his blood money in the back office. "The lady said she's done singing," Luke said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. All eyes turned to him. He stood relaxed in the doorway, hands loose at his sides. But there was something in his posture that made the gang members reassess. This wasn't some drunk cowboy or frightened townsperson. "This ain't your business, stranger," the leader said, though his hand drifted toward his gun. "I'm making it my business." Luke stepped into the room, and something in the way he moved made several men step back instinctively. "Let her go." Clara's eyes widened in recognition. "Luke?" The name came out as barely a whisper. The leader laughed, though it sounded forced. "You know this saddle tramp? Songbird? Well, that changes nothing. We paid for entertainment, and we aim to get it. You can get it somewhere else," Luke said. His voice remained calm, almost conversational, but his gray eyes had gone cold as winter stone. "Let her go!" The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Luke had positioned himself perfectly, back to a wall, clear sight lines to all 5 men. His reputation had preceded him. He could see it in the way they looked at him, calculating odds. "You're Harland," one of them said suddenly. "The scout. Heard about you." "Then you've heard enough to know this won't end well for you," Luke replied. The leader's face twisted with indecision. Pride warred with survival instinct. Finally, he released Clara's arm with a rough shove. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway. Plenty of other entertainment to be had." They filed out, throwing dark looks back at Luke. He waited until they were gone before moving to Clara, who stood frozen as if she couldn't quite believe what had happened. "You came back," she said. "Passing through," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. Up close, he could see what 3 years had done to her. Lines of hardship around her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before, but underneath it all, the same strength that had first drawn him to her. "Thank you," Clara said, "though you've likely made things worse. The Wallace gang doesn't forget slights." "Neither do I," Luke said. He wanted to touch her, to smooth away the fear he still saw lingering in her expression, but he kept his hands at his sides. "What's Blackwood playing at? Dealing with outlaws?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Playing at getting rich. The town's gone to hell since you left. The drought killed off the respectable businesses. And what's left?" She gestured at the saloon. "We survive on whatever coin the devil brings through the door." "And you? Why are you still here?" She looked away. Where else would I go? This is the only life available to women like me. That's not true. Isn't it? Her eyes flashed with anger. You think I haven't tried to leave? You think I haven't saved every penny, applied for respectable work? But they all know what I am. A saloon singer. Might as well wear a scarlet letter. The pain in her voice cut him deep. 3 years of imagining their reunion, and he'd never pictured this. The defeat in her shoulders, the resignation in her tone. Clara, I should go, she interrupted. Blackwood will hear about this. He doesn't like his property causing trouble. Property? The word came out sharp. That's what I am to him. What I am to all of them. She turned away. Thank you for intervening, but please, don't make this harder than it is. She disappeared through the door behind the bar before he could respond. Luke stood alone in the wrecked saloon, fists clenched at his sides. Through the window, he could see the Wallace gang mounting their horses, heading for their camp outside town. He memorized their faces, their horses, the way they rode. Outside, the desert wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning down the empty street. Luke walked slowly, thinking. He'd come back to Cedar Ridge drawn by a memory, a ghost of possibility. But the Clara he'd found was fighting a battle he only half understood, trapped by circumstances that simple violence couldn't solve. From the shadows across the street, he watched the saloon. An hour later, Blackwood emerged from his office, and Luke got his first good look at the man who claimed to own Clara May, fat, greasy, with the confident swagger of a man who'd never faced real opposition, the kind who grew brave when backed by hired guns and social convention. Luke had faced down Apache war parties, survived blizzards in the high country, tracked outlaws through hell itself. But looking at Blackwood, at the casual cruelty in his movements, Luke felt a different kind of anger. This was the civilized world's violence, slower than a bullet, but just as deadly. Killing spirits instead of bodies. As the moon rose higher, Luke made his decision. He'd return to Cedar Ridge for a ghost, a memory of one perfect dance. But ghosts couldn't be rescued. Only the living could be saved. And Clara May was still alive, still fighting, despite everything arrayed against her. One stormy dance, he murmured to the darkness, remembering his whispered words from 3 years past, and the quiet scout returned to light her fire. He'd spoken truer than he knew. The fire in Clara was dimmed but not extinguished, and Luke Harland had learned in his years of wandering that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in facing death, but in choosing to truly live. The night deepened, and Luke began to plan. The knock on Clara's door came just after midnight, soft but insistent. She sat up in her narrow bed, heart racing. After the confrontation in the saloon, she'd barricaded herself in, expecting trouble. Blackwood had already sent word that she'd cost him money, that there would be consequences. Clara, it's Luke, please. She hesitated, then moved the chair she'd propped against the door. He stood in the dim hallway, hat in hand, looking like he'd wrestled with himself before coming. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. If Blackwood finds out, may I come in, just to talk? Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. Her room was small and sparse, a bed, a washstand, a trunk that held her few possessions. She was suddenly aware of how shabby it must seem to someone who'd seen the wide world. Luke didn't seem to notice. His attention was on her, taking in the bruise forming on her arm where the outlaw had grabbed her, the way she held herself like she expected a blow. This can't continue, he said simply. Clara laughed, a broken sound. You think I don't know that? You think I choose this? She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. You were gone 3 years. Luke, 3 years. You don't know what it's been like. Then tell me. She faced him, anger flashing in her eyes. Why? So you can ride in like some storybook hero and save me? Life isn't a fairy tale. There's no rescue for women like me. You're not women like you, Luke said firmly. You're Clara May, and you deserve better than this. Deserving doesn't matter, the words burst out of her. Years of pain and frustration, finally finding voice. Don't you understand? I'm trapped. Blackwood owns my contract. The whole town sees me as fallen. Where would I go? What would I do? I have $12 saved. $12 after 3 years of degradation. Luke reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, setting it on her small table. There's enough there to get you to San Francisco. Start over. New name if you need it. Clara stared at the pouch like it might bite her. I can't take your money. It's not charity. It's... He struggled for words. It's payment for a debt. What debt? The one I owe to the memory of the woman who danced with me 3 years ago. The woman whose voice kept me sane in places where madness would have been easier. His gray eyes held hers. I have survived things that should have killed me. Clara, each time. I heard your voice, remembered that dance, and found a reason to keep going. Clara sank onto the edge of her bed, overwhelmed. You don't owe me anything. It was just a dance. Was it? Luke moved closer, still careful not to crowd her. Tell me you haven't thought about it. Tell me it didn't mean anything. She couldn't. The tears came then. Silent at first, then in great gasping sobs. 3 years of holding herself together, of maintaining her dignity in the face of constant humiliation. And this quiet man's kindness undid her completely. Luke sat beside her, not touching, just present. When her sobs quieted, he handed her his handkerchief. It smelled of leather and trail dust and something indefinably him. My family died of fever, Clara said softly. I was 17. The farm went for debts. I tried to find respectable work, but... She shrugged. A girl alone, no references, no family. The offers I got were all the same type. At least singing meant I could keep some dignity. Or so I thought. You have more dignity than anyone in this town, Luke said. Dignity doesn't fill an empty stomach, doesn't keep a roof overhead. She wiped her eyes. I came here because I heard they needed singers. Thought it would be different, but everywhere's the same for women without protection. You have protection now. Clara looked at him sharply. For how long? Until your next job calls? Until the wandering fever takes you again? Luke was quiet for a moment. You're right. I can't promise to stay. The trail is what I know, who I am. But I can promise this, you won't face Blackwood or the Wallace gang alone, not while I'm here. And when you leave, then you leave too. Take the money. Go somewhere they don't know you. Become who you were meant to be. Clara stood, pacing the small room. You make it sound simple. Simple, no. Possible, yes. Luke rose as well. Clara, I've seen people survive impossible things. Seen them cross deserts with no water, climb mountains in blizzards, fight off wolves with nothing but determination. You're stronger than any of them. How do you know? Because they were fighting for their lives. You've been fighting for your soul. That's harder. The words hung between them, heavy with truth. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built to survive. Hope hurt worse than despair because hope could be disappointed. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it keep you caged. Luke moved toward the door, then paused. Think about it. The money's yours either way. No obligations, no expectations. Luke. She didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed too small. That night, the dance, I need you to know it meant something. Means something. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw a thing. I've held on to that. His expression softened. So have I. After he left, Clara sat on her bed, the leather pouch heavy in her hands. She opened it, gasping at the amount inside. Enough for passage to San Francisco. Enough to live on while she found work. Enough to buy respectable clothes that might let her blend in with decent folk. She thought of Luke's words, of the conviction in his gray eyes. He believed she could do this. More importantly, he made her believe it might be possible. A sound in the hallway made her quickly hide the pouch beneath her mattress. Blackwood's heavy tread passed her door without stopping, but the reminder of his presence chilled her. She'd seen what he did to girls who tried to leave. The last one had been found in an alley. beaten so badly she couldn't work for weeks. But Luke was here now. The quiet scout who'd faced down 5 armed men without flinching. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. She lay back on her bed, still clutching his handkerchief. It was foolish, she knew, to let herself feel this way. He'd been clear, he couldn't stay. The wandering life was in his blood. But for now, for tonight, she wasn't alone. Outside her window, she could see stars scattered across the desert sky like spilled silver. The same stars Luke had slept under for 3 years, carrying her memory. The thought warmed her more than any fire. One stormy dance with the saloon singer, she whispered to the darkness, remembering his words. And the quiet scout returned to light her fire. The fire had been embers for so long, barely warm enough to keep her alive. But tonight, with his money under her mattress and his faith in her heart, she felt the first flickers of real flame. Not the desperate heat of attraction, though that was there too. Undeniable and dangerous. This was something else. This was the fire of possibility, of a future beyond these walls. Clara May closed her eyes and, for the first time in 3 years, allowed herself to dream of escape. In her dreams, Luke was there, his steady presence making all things possible. She knew better than to count on anyone but herself. But tonight, just tonight, she let herself imagine what it might be like to not be alone. The desert wind rattled her window, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. Blackwood wouldn't give her up easily. The Wallace gang wouldn't forget the insult. The town would close ranks against any attempt to change the order of things. But tonight, Clara May had hope. And in the frontier, sometimes hope was all that separated the living from the merely surviving. The Wallace gang struck 2 nights later, just as the saloon reached its rowdiest. Clara had noticed them filtering in throughout the evening, not all at once, but in pairs, trying to appear casual. Her skin prickled with warning, but Blackwood had made it clear she was to work as usual or face the consequences. She was mid-song when all hell broke loose. The Batwing doors burst open and Blackjack Wallace himself strode in, flanked by 3 more of his men. That made 9 total, all armed, all with the look of men who'd come for blood. The saloon's regular patrons scrambled for exits or pressed themselves against walls. "Blackwood!" Wallace roared. "You owe us for the disrespect." Ezra Blackwood emerged from his office, trying to look unconcerned but sweating profusely. "Now, Jack, that weren't my doing. Just some drifter causing trouble. Your establishment, your responsibility." Wallace cut him off. His eyes found Clara on the stage. "Besides, we paid for entertainment that night. Never got it." Clara's hands trembled on the microphone stand, but she kept her chin high. She'd learned that showing fear only encouraged men like these. "Sing," Wallace commanded. "Something sweet for me and my boys." Before Clara could respond, a voice came from the back corner. "The ladies' performance is over for the evening." Luke stepped from the shadows where he'd been nursing a whiskey. Clara's heart both soared and sank. She'd known he was somewhere nearby these past 2 days. A guardian presence, but she'd hoped to avoid this confrontation. Wallace's hand dropped to his gun. "You again. Should have known you'd be sniffing around. Well, Scout, you're outnumbered 9 to 1. Not even Luke Harland can beat those odds. He's not alone." The voice came from near the bar. Samuel Morrison, the town's gunsmith, stepped forward with a shotgun. Clara blinked in surprise. Morrison had never shown her anything but cold courtesy. "Neither are you," another voice added. Doc Harper moved to flank Luke's other side, his old Navy Colt steady in his weathered hands. One by one, other men stood. Not many, 5 in total, including Luke. But Clara recognized them as some of the few decent men left in Cedar Ridge. Men who'd apparently had enough. Wallace's eyes darted around, calculating. The numbers still favored him. But these weren't drunk cowboys. These were hard men who'd survived the frontier. "This ain't your fight, Morrison," Wallace said. "Maybe not," the gunsmith replied. "But I'm tired of watching thugs terrorize our town. My daughter can't walk the streets safely anymore. Time that changed." The tension stretched taut as a hangman's rope. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, loud as thunder. The oil lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows that made every movement seem threatening. Then Wallace made his move. His gun cleared leather fast, but Luke was faster. The scout's Colt spoke first, and Wallace's weapon spun from his hand as he cursed and grabbed his bleeding fingers. The saloon erupted in gunfire. Clara dropped behind the piano as bullets whined overhead. The mirror behind the bar exploded in a shower of glass. Men shouted, guns roared, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Through the chaos, she saw Luke moving with deadly precision, using cover, picking his shots. He'd flipped a table for shelter and was steadily working through the outlaws. Morrison's shotgun boomed, and one of Wallace's men flew backward through a window. But the gang members were fighting back hard. Doc Harper cried out and fell, clutching his shoulder. One of the townsmen was down, motionless. The battle seesawed back and forth. Clara spotted movement to her left, one of the outlaws creeping toward Luke's blind spot, gun raised. Without thinking, she grabbed a whiskey bottle and hurled it. It caught the man in the temple, dropping him just as he fired. The bullet went wild, and Luke spun, finishing the job. Their eyes met across the smoky room. "Stay down," he shouted. More gunfire. Blackwood tried to flee and caught a stray bullet, falling with a shriek. The remaining outlaws were backing toward the door, firing wildly. Wallace, clutching his mangled hand, screamed for retreat as suddenly as it began. It ended. The surviving gang members fled into the night, leaving 3 of their dead behind. The saloon looked like a war zone. Tables overturned, windows shattered, bullet holes in every wall. Luke was at Clara's side instantly, hands checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was shaking, ears ringing. The bottle still clutched in her hand. "Doc Harper? I'll live." The doctor groaned. "Morrison already working to stop the bleeding. Though I'm too old for this nonsense." Sheriff Daniels arrived 20 minutes later, looking put upon at having his evening interrupted. He surveyed the carnage with the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Self-defense," Morrison said flatly. "The Wallace gang attacked. We defended ourselves, unless you're planning to take their side." The threat in his tone was clear. Daniels might be lazy and corrupt, but he wasn't stupid. The mood in the saloon had shifted. The decent men of Cedar Ridge had remembered they had spines. No, of course not," Daniels stammered. "Clear case of self-defense. I'll write it up proper." He beat a hasty retreat, leaving them to tend their wounded and dead. Clara found herself helping Doc Harper treat injuries, her hands steady now that she had something to do. Luke worked alongside her, their movements synchronized without words. Blackwood survived his wound, but was in no shape to protest when Morrison informed him the saloon was under new management. "You can sell to Tom Wheeler for a fair price, or we can investigate your dealings with outlaws. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. Blackwood, pale and sweating, agreed to sell. As dawn broke over Cedar Ridge, the saloon finally emptied. Clara stood among the wreckage, hardly believing what had happened. In one night, everything had changed. "You threw that bottle," Luke said, coming up beside her. "Saved my life. You saved mine first." She turned to him, seeing the weariness in his eyes, the graze on his cheek where a bullet had come too close. "Why did Morrison and the others help?" Luke smiled slightly. "Turns out you've got more friends than you knew. Morrison's daughter, Mary, told him how you'd shared your food with her when her family was struggling last winter. Doc Harper remembers when you sat all night with the Murphy boy when he was sick, singing to keep him calm. You thought no one noticed, but they did." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. All those small kindnesses she'd offered, thinking they meant nothing, thinking she meant nothing. "The town's changing," Luke continued. "Wallace won't be back. He's lost too many men, lost face. Blackwood's finished. Wheeler's a decent man. He'll run the place honest." "And where does that leave me?" Clara asked. "Free," Luke said simply. Free to stay, free to go, free to choose. She looked at him, this quiet man who'd started an uprising just by standing up for what was right. What do you choose? His gray eyes held hers. Depends on what you choose. Clara felt her heart skip. Luke Harland, are you saying you'd give up the trail for a saloon singer? No, he said, and her heart sank. Then he smiled. I'm saying I'd give it up for Clara May. The woman who sings like an angel and throws bottles like a warrior. The woman who kept her dignity when the world tried to strip it away. The woman I've carried with me for 3 years. The morning sun slanted through the broken windows, painting everything in gold. Outside, Cedar Ridge was waking up to a new day, a new possibility. The old order had been broken along with the saloon's mirrors. I need time, Clara said, to figure out who I am without Blackwood's shadow over me, to decide what I want. Time you've got, Luke assured her. I've got a contract to guide a scientific expedition in the spring, 6 months away. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, I'll find you then. Clara reached up, touching the graze on his cheek with gentle fingers. And if I'm not here, then I'll keep looking until I find you. One stormy dance with a saloon singer, remember? That story's not finished yet. She smiled then, the first real smile she'd worn in years. No, it's not. As the sun climbed higher, they stood together among the wreckage and possibility. Two souls who'd found each other across all the lonely miles. Whatever came next, Clara knew she'd face it with her head high. She was Clara May, and she was finally free. The morning after the gunfight found Clara in Doc Harper's small office, helping to change his bandages. Luke sat nearby, having refused to leave until he was certain the doctor would recover fully. The intimacy of the moment, just the three of them in the quiet morning light, felt both strange and right. Hold still, Doc, Clara said softly, her fingers gentle but efficient as she worked. This needs to be tight. You've got healing hands, girl, Harper said, wincing slightly. Ever think about learning proper nursing? Clara's hands stilled. Women like me don't become nurses. Doc, women like you, Harper snorted. You mean women with steady hands, clear heads, and compassion? Seems to me those are exactly the qualities needed. He looked at Luke. You talk sense into her. Harland, girl's got a gift. After Harper was settled, Luke walked Clara back to the saloon. The broken glass had been swept up, but bullet holes still scarred the walls. In daylight, the place looked smaller, shabbier, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Where will you stay? Luke asked. Your room here. Mrs. Fleming offered me a room at the boarding house, Clara said, still amazed by the offer. Said she'd been wrong about me. Seems saving your life changed some minds. They climbed the stairs to her small room one last time. Clara began packing her few possessions into a worn carpet bag. Luke watched from the doorway, memorizing every movement. Tell me about this expedition, she said, folding her burgundy dress, the one she'd worn that first night. Group of scientists from back east. They want to map the canyon lands, study the rock formations. 6 months, maybe more. He paused. Good money. Enough to start fresh somewhere. Clara heard what he wasn't saying. Enough for 2 to start fresh. That's a long time. I've waited 3 years. 6 months is nothing. He moved into the room, pulled something from his pocket. I want you to have this. It was a small silver locket, tarnished with age, but beautiful. Luke, I can't. It was my mother's. One of the few things I kept when I came west. He opened it, revealing a tiny photograph of a woman with kind eyes. She would have liked you. Would have said you've got backbone. Clara's throat tightened. What if I'm not here when you get back? What if I take your money and disappear? Then I'll know you're somewhere safe, living the life you deserve. That's all I want. Clara, for you to be free to choose. She set down the locket carefully and crossed to him. You talk about what I deserve. What about what you deserve? What do I deserve? Someone who sees past the legend. Someone who knows you're more than just the quiet scout who tames the wilderness. She reached up, touching his face. Someone who's been waiting for you too. The kiss was inevitable as sunrise, soft at first, then deeper as 3 years of longing poured out between them. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Clara," Luke said roughly. Shh. She pressed fingers to his lips. "No promises. Not yet. We both need time to figure out who we are without the shadows." "But Luke?" She smiled. "I'll be here when you get back." They were interrupted by footsteps on the stairs. Tom Wheeler appeared, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Clara, sorry to intrude, but we need to discuss your situation." Clara tensed, but Wheeler quickly continued. "I'd like to offer you employment. Honest employment. The saloon needs entertainment, but I'm thinking more along the lines of a proper dinner theater. Respectable shows, early evenings, families welcome. You'd have a contract, fair wages, and absolutely no obligations beyond singing." I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready." Wheeler tipped his hat and left. Luke was grinning. "Dinner theater. You'd be perfect." "Would I?" Clara sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to be respectable. Luke, what if I do it wrong?" "There's no wrong way to be yourself." He sat beside her, took her hand. "You've been playing a role for so long. You've forgotten that's not who you are. Clara May isn't the saloon singer. She's the woman who sang lullabies to sick children, who shared her food with the hungry, who stood up to outlaws, who fell in love with a wandering scout." Clara added softly. Luke's breath caught. "Clara, I know. Too soon for words like that, but I want you to carry it with you on the trail. Want you to know that someone's here, thinking of you, praying for your safe return." She squeezed his hand. "Not because you saved me, because you saw me, the real me." They spent the day together, walking the town that suddenly seemed less hostile. People nodded respectfully. Some even smiled. At the general store, Mrs. Jameson actually spoke to Clara, asking after her health. The transformation was dizzying. "It won't all be easy," Luke warned as they stood by the well watching the sunset. "Some folks have long memories. There'll still be whispers. I know, but whispers can't hurt me anymore." Clara drew a deep breath. "I think I will take Wheeler's offer, and maybe I'll talk to Doc Harper about learning nursing. See if there's a way. There's always a way for someone with your strength." That evening, Luke helped her move into Mrs. Fleming's boarding house. The room was simple but clean, with a window overlooking the mountains. Clara hung her dresses in the wardrobe, placed Luke's locket on the small dresser. "When do you leave?" she asked. "Day after tomorrow. Need to gather supplies. Check my gear." He hesitated. "I could delay. No, the expedition needs you, and we need this time." Clara turned from the window. "I need to know I can stand on my own, that I'm choosing you because I want to, not because I need saving. You never needed saving. Just a fair chance." They stood close in the small room, neither wanting to break the spell. Finally, Luke stepped back. "I should go. Mrs. Fleming runs a respectable house." Clara laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. "Yes, she does, and I'm a respectable boarder now." At the door, Luke paused. "That first night, during the storm, did you feel it too? Like something shifted in the world?" "Yes," Clara said simply. "Like I'd been sleeping and suddenly woke up." 6 months, he promised. 6 months, she agreed. The next morning, Clara woke early and dressed carefully in a simple blue dress Mrs. Fleming had altered for her. She looked in the mirror and saw not the saloon singer, but a woman with possibilities stretching before her like an open road. She spent the day making plans. Wheeler was delighted she'd accepted his offer and immediately began discussing repertoire for the dinner theater. Doc Harper was cautiously optimistic about teaching her basic nursing skills. "Won't be official training," he warned, "but I can teach you enough to be useful." That evening, she found Luke at the livery stable, checking his horse's shoes and organizing his pack. They worked together in comfortable silence, her handing him supplies as he needed them. "I have something for you," Clara said finally, pulling out a small, wrapped package. Inside was a blue bandana, carefully embroidered with his initials. "I know it's not much. It's perfect." And Luke tied it around his neck immediately. "Now I'll carry part of you with me." They walked to the edge of town as the stars emerged. The desert stretched endlessly before them, beautiful and dangerous and full of promise. "In the spring," Luke said, "when I come back, things will be different. Everything's already different." Clara linked her arm through his. "But yes, in the spring, we'll both be ready for whatever comes next. No more storms," he teased gently. "Oh, there'll be storms, but we've weathered worse." She looked up at him. "Dance with me?" There was no music but the wind, no floor but the dusty ground, but Luke took her in his arms and they swayed together under the vast sky. This time, there was no desperation, no sorrow. Just two people choosing each other, choosing hope. One stormy dance with the saloon singer. Clara murmured against his chest, and the quiet scout returned to light her fire. Luke finished, "Though it seems to me you've lit your own fire just fine. Maybe, but it burns brighter when you're here." They danced until the moon rose full and bright, casting silver shadows across the desert. Tomorrow would bring partings and challenges. 6 long months of separation. But tonight, they had a dance without storms, a promise without words, and the certainty that some things were worth waiting for. 5 months had passed since Luke's departure when trouble returned to Cedar Ridge. Clara had settled into her new life, singing at Wheeler's Reformed Saloon 3 evenings a week, studying medicine with Doc Harper during the days, and slowly earning the town's grudging respect. But the past, it seemed, was not finished with her. Ezra Blackwood had recovered from his wound, but not his pride. He'd taken the money from the saloon sale and disappeared, most assumed for good. But on a cold February morning, he returned with Sheriff Daniels and 2 federal marshals, claiming Luke Harland was a murderer. Clara was at Doc Harper's when Mrs. Fleming burst in with the news. "They're saying Luke killed those men in cold blood, that it wasn't self-defense at all." The blood drained from Clara's face. "That's a lie. We all saw what happened." Blackwood's paid witnesses to say otherwise. Mrs. Fleming wrung her hands. "Says you were part of it, that you and Luke planned the whole thing to take over the saloon." Clara's mind raced. Luke wasn't due back for another month, but if word reached him, he'd return to face the charges. Walk right into Blackwood's trap. "Where are they now?" she asked. "The Oak Hotel. Daniels is holding court there, collecting testimony." Mrs. Fleming's voice dripped contempt. Clara found Tom Wheeler at the saloon, Morrison at his forge, and the other men who'd stood with Luke that night. They gathered in Wheeler's office, faces grim. "Blackwood's bought himself a hanging," Morrison said bluntly. "Those marshals believe his story." "Then we tell them the truth." Clara said, "Our word against his paid witnesses." Wheeler shook his head. "And Daniels backs him, says we're all conspirators." Clara felt the walls closing in. The same trapped sensation she'd lived with for years. But this time, it wasn't just her freedom at stake. It was Luke's life. "There has to be something we can do," she insisted. Doc Harper, arm still weak from his wound, spoke up. "There is, but it's dangerous. We need proof of Blackwood's corruption, documents, letters, something that shows his connection to the Wallace gang." "His office," Clara said suddenly. "At the saloon. He left in a hurry. Might have left something behind." But Wheeler shook his head. "First place, the marshals searched. Found nothing." Clara's heart sank. Then she remembered. Blackwood's other office. The private room at the Regency Hotel, where he'd conducted his shadier business. He had another place, room 7 at the Regency. Kept it even after he sold the saloon. Morrison's eyes lit up. "If there's evidence anywhere, it's suicide," Wheeler warned. "Breaking into private property, with federal marshals in town? Then I'll go alone." Clara said, "This is my fault. If I hadn't—" "Stop," Morrison's voice was firm. "This is Blackwood's doing, not yours. And you're not going alone." They planned quickly. The town council meeting that night would draw Daniels and hopefully the marshals. Clara would search Blackwood's room while Morrison kept watch. As darkness fell, Clara's hands shook as she pinned up her hair. She'd changed so much in 5 months. Learned to suture wounds, to read medical texts, to hold her head high on the street. But tonight, she felt like the scared saloon singer again. No, she was Clara May, and Luke Harland needed her to be strong. The Regency Hotel was nearly empty, its clerk conveniently absent, Wheeler's doing. Clara climbed to the second floor, lockpicks in hand, another skill from her old life, learned from a traveling performer who'd taken pity on a hungry girl. Room 7's lock yielded quickly. Inside, the space reeked of stale cigars and corruption. Clara lit a small lamp and began searching. Drawers yielded nothing. The wardrobe was empty, desperation mounting. She checked behind furniture, under the mattress. Then she saw it, a loose floorboard near the window. Prying it up, she found a leather portfolio stuffed with papers. Letters from Wallace planning raids on shipments Blackwood had informed him about. Records of bribes to Daniels, most damning, a contract putting a bounty on Luke Harland's head, dated before the saloon fight. Well, the songbird's become a thief. Clara spun. Blackwood stood in the doorway, derringer in hand, behind him. Sheriff Daniels smirked. "Thought you might try something stupid," Blackwood continued. "Been watching the room." He stepped inside, Daniels closing the door behind them. "Those papers won't help you. See, you're about to have an accident. Terrible thing. A desperate woman killing herself when faced with arrest." Clara backed toward the window, clutching the portfolio. Her mind raced, calculating options. The Derringer was small but deadly at this range. Daniels had his hand on his gun, too. "You killed those men," she said, stalling. "Set up the whole thing. I created an opportunity," Blackwood corrected. "Your scout friend just played his part perfectly, though I must admit, I didn't expect the town to grow a spine." His eyes glittered with malice. "No matter. With you dead and him hanged, I'll buy back my saloon cheap. The whole town knows I'm here. The whole town thinks you're at the council meeting. Morrison's there, swearing you arrived with him." Daniels laughed. "We made sure he saw someone in your cloak enter the building." Clara's heart sank. They'd been outmaneuvered. But then she heard it, footsteps in the hall. Multiple sets, moving fast. Blackwood heard it too. His face twisted. "Do it now!" He snarled at Daniels. The sheriff drew his gun just as the door burst open. But it wasn't Morrison. It was Tom Wheeler, backed by the 2 federal marshals. "Drop the weapons," Marshal Bedford commanded. Chaos erupted. Daniels spun toward the door. Blackwood's Derringer swung toward Clara. She threw herself sideways as the small gun cracked, the bullet splintering the window frame. Papers scattered as she hit the floor. More gunshots. Shouts. When Clara looked up, Daniels was on the ground, clutching his shoulder. Blackwood was backed against the wall, Marshal Bedford's gun steady on him. "Miss May, are you hurt?" Wheeler helped her to her feet. "No, She looked at him in shock. "How?" Doc Harper figured Blackwood might be watching his old haunts. "We've been watching too." Wheeler smiled grimly. "The marshals were very interested when we showed them the real evidence Morrison found this afternoon, including Blackwood's signed confession from when Doc treated his wound. Amazing what a man will sign when he thinks he's dying." Marshal Bedford collected the scattered papers, whistling low at their contents. "Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges." "This is entrapment," Blackwood sputtered. "That woman broke into my room." "What woman?" Bedford asked mildly. "I see only concerned citizens who heard gunshots and came to investigate. Found you and the sheriff attacking each other. Shameful." As they led Blackwood and Daniels away, Clara sank into a chair, adrenaline leaving her shaky. Wheeler sat beside her. "Luke's safe now," he said gently. "The marshals will clear his name. He'll come back when he hears." Clara said, "Leave the expedition early." Would that be so bad? Clara thought of all she'd accomplished in 5 months, the respect she'd earned, the skills she'd learned, the woman she'd become. No, I'm ready now. Ready to choose him because I want to, not because I need to. The trial was swift. With Blackwood's own documents and the marshal's testimony, the verdict was inevitable. Blackwood would spend years in federal prison. Daniels, who'd turned state's evidence, would serve less time but never wear a badge again. Clara testified with calm dignity, the packed courtroom hanging on every word. When she stepped down, she noticed several townswomen nodding approvingly. Mrs. Preston even smiled slightly. That night, Clara sang at Wheeler's establishment, now officially renamed the Desert Rose Theater. Her voice soared with joy and relief, filling the room with hope. In the audience, families sat alongside cowboys, all equally entranced. Later, as she walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars, Clara touched the locket at her throat. "One more month," she whispered to the night. "One more month, and then, a new chapter would begin. Not a desperate escape from shadows, but a conscious choice made in light. She was Clara May, singer, healer, survivor, and soon, she would be Clara May, choosing love with her whole heart. The desert wind carried her words across the miles, and somewhere in a canyon camp, Luke Harland woke with her name on his lips and a certainty that it was time to come home. The spring wind carried the scent of sage and new beginnings as Luke Harland rode into Cedar Ridge. 6 months had changed him. His hair was longer, his clothes dustier, but his gray eyes held a new certainty. The expedition had been successful, the scientists pleased. But all Luke could think about during those long months was returning to Clara. The town looked different in the afternoon light. Cleaner somehow, more prosperous. New paint brightened several storefronts, and children played in the streets without fear. The Desert Rose Theater bore a sign announcing, "Clara May performs tonight, songs of hope and home." Luke stabled his horse and walked to Mrs. Fleming's boarding house, heart hammering. Would Clara be there? Had she waited? Or had she taken his money and found her freedom elsewhere? Mrs. Fleming answered his knock with a broad smile. "Mr. Harland, Lord be praised, you're back safe. She's at the theater, rehearsing. Been there since dawn. Nervous as a cat." "Nervous? Today's special. She'll want to tell you herself." Mrs. Fleming's eyes twinkled. "Go on, then. Don't keep her waiting." Luke found the theater transformed. Proper seats replaced rough benches. A real stage had been built, with curtains and footlights. But his eyes found only Clara, standing center stage in a dress of soft green, her hair gleaming in the light. She was singing, not the mournful ballads of old, but something bright and soaring. When she saw him, her voice faltered, then strengthened, finishing the song while never breaking eye contact. "Luke!" She flew down the stage steps and into his arms. "You're early. You weren't supposed to." He silenced her with a kiss, pouring 6 months of longing into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "Couldn't wait another day," he said roughly. "The expedition ended early, and I rode hard. Clara, you look different." She smiled, stepping back to let him see. She did look different. Healthier, stronger, glowing with a confidence that came from within. "I have so much to tell you." Mrs. Fleming said today was special. Clara's eyes sparkled. "Doc Harper's retiring. There's a new doctor coming from Denver, and he needs an assistant, someone with medical training." She paused dramatically. "He's agreed to take me on official apprenticeship. In 2 years, I could qualify as a proper nurse." Luke swept her up, spinning her around. "That's wonderful. I knew you could do it. That's not all." She waited until he set her down. "Tom Wheeler's offered to make me a partner in the theater. Silent partner, small percentage, but enough to have a say in how it's run. And Luke..." She took a deep breath. "I've saved almost every penny from performing. Between that and what you left me, I have enough to do whatever I want. Go wherever I choose. And what do you choose? Clara took his hands. First, tell me about the expedition. Tell me everything. They sat in the empty theater as Luke shared stories of ancient ruins and painted canyons, of nights under impossible stars and days of grinding heat. He showed her sketches the scientists had made, artifacts they'd found. They want me to lead another expedition, he said finally. Year-long trip to map the territories beyond the Colorado. Good money. Important work. Clara's heart sank, though she kept her expression neutral. When would you leave? That depends. Luke studied her face. Clara, these 6 months taught me something. I've spent years running toward the horizon, thinking freedom meant always moving. But real freedom is choosing where you belong, and I belong wherever you are. Luke, I can't ask you to give up. You're not asking, I'm choosing. He pulled out a rolled paper. I had a lawyer draw this up in Denver. Partnership agreement for a guide service. Short expeditions only. Nothing longer than a month. Based out of Cedar Ridge. He smiled. Turns out there's plenty of Easterners who want to see the wilderness but don't want to disappear into it. Clara stared at the paper, then at him. You do that? Give up the long trails? I'm not giving up anything. I'm gaining a home, a real home, with you. He cupped her face gently. If you'll have me. I know we've only had one dance and a few stolen hours, but, Clara, I've loved you since. Yes. The word burst out of her, followed by laughter and tears. Yes, to all of it. To partnership, to building a life, to finally finishing that dance we started. They kissed again, deeper this time, with the promise of all the days to come, when they parted. Luke pulled out a small box. This isn't proper, he said. I should court you officially. Take time, but I've waited so long already. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small sapphire. It's not much. It's perfect. Clara held out her hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When? Tomorrow if you're willing. Or next month. Or next year. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, Clara said firmly. I've been ready since you walked back into my life. No, since before that. Since a quiet scout asked a saloon singer to dance. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church. Half the town attended, including Mrs. Preston, who proclaimed that she'd always known Clara was a good girl at heart. Doc Harper gave Clara away. Tom Wheeler stood as Luke's best man, and Mrs. Fleming cried through the entire ceremony. That evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and rose, Luke and Clara stood on the hill overlooking Cedar Ridge. Their small house, purchased with expedition money and theater profits, waited below, a symbol of the life they'd built together. No regrets? Clara asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. Only one, Luke said, that it took me 3 years to come back. You came back exactly when we were both ready. Clara turned in his arms. We needed that time to become who we are. The desperate saloon singer and the restless scout couldn't have built this. But Clara May Harland, nurse in training, and Luke Harland, businessman and guide? We can build anything. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they looked up to see storm clouds building over the mountains. But this time, neither felt the old restlessness, the need to run. They were home. Looks like rain, Luke observed. Perfect weather for dancing, Clara replied. As the first drops fell, they swayed together on the hillside. No music but the wind, no audience but the desert. The storm that had brought them together blessed their new beginning, washing the past clean and nourishing the seeds of their future. One stormy dance with the saloon singer, Luke murmured against her hair, and the quiet scout returned to light her fire. Clara finished, though I think we've both been lighting fires. A whole lifetime of fires. Luke agreed, warm enough to last through any storm. Below them, Cedar Ridge settled into evening, lamplight glowing in windows where families gathered. The Desert Rose Theater would open soon, Clara's voice bringing joy instead of sorrow. Doc Harper would train her in healing arts, and she'd help bring new life into the world. Luke would show travelers the beauty of the wilderness while always returning to her arms. They'd found their place in the wild frontier, not by conquering it or escaping it, but by choosing to plant roots and grow. The saloon singer and the scout had become something more. Partners, healers, guides. Most importantly, they'd become each other's home. As the rain intensified, they ran hand in hand down the hill, laughing like children. Behind them, lightning illuminated the mountains, and thunder applauded their joy. The storm had brought them together, and storms would come again. But now they'd weather them side by side, their love a fire that no amount of rain could extinguish. In the distance, a rainbow arced across the desert sky, nature's promise that after every storm comes beauty. Clara and Luke paused at their door, turning back to see it. "Look," Clara whispered. "Our new beginning." "No," Luke corrected gently, pulling her close. "Our happy ending and our happy beginning, all at once." They entered their home together as the storm passed over Cedar Ridge, leaving the air clean and sweet with promise. Through the window, the rainbow lingered, a bridge between the wild sky and the tamed earth, between what was and what would be. And in that small house on the edge of the frontier, two hearts that had wandered long and far finally found their resting place in each other. The quiet scout and the saloon singer had written their own legend, not with gunfire and gold, but with courage, patience, and a love strong enough to light any darkness. The frontier would continue to challenge them, but they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long journey? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Luke's journey in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to us, and I can't wait to hear what touched your heart in this story of love conquering all odds in the American frontier.